Hi, everyone out there in webinar land. This is Marcel Rodarty coming to you live from Contract City's Project Roomkey headquarters in front of the nearest Motel 6 to you. So these jokes are way funnier when there's people actually laughing and stuff. But we're going to get started. We have a couple folks joining us today. We actually have three that are joining us today. First, Meredith Berkson is the Director of Policy and Systems at LASA. Meredith started her work in homeless services over a decade ago, and as an intern case manager for the Glide Foundation's drop-in center. Hang on, I got some audio in the background that's bothering me. Let me take that off. Hang on, sorry guys. After moving back to Los Angeles, she worked at the People's Concern Access Center of Santa Monica and helped agency pilot and implement coordinated entry, CES, then moved to PATH, first as a director of coordinated entry. I got a echo over here. First as the director of coordinated entry, let me find my spot again. And then as regional director of South County programs at PATH, she oversaw SPA 7 CES and the immense growth of the South County Department and Service portfolio, including prevention, problem solving, outreach, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing programs. Before joining LASA, she consulted with the Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative, providing her direct service lens to their policy work. Meredith is passionate about changing policies and systems to better address the needs of people on the brink of and experiencing homelessness. Then we have Elizabeth Benishai as a principal analyst on the Homeless Initiative team at the Los Angeles County Chief Executive Office, where she is working to implement the county's strategic plan to combat and prevent homelessness. As part of her work with HI, Elizabeth manages the aggregation and reporting of performance data from HI strategy leads, oversees employment and rental subsidy related strategies, and is the lead for projects Roomkey and Homekey. Prior to joining the HI, Elizabeth worked at the Center for Law and Social Policy with CLASP, a national anti-poverty organization based in Washington, D.C., and as political science professor at Albion College, a liberal arts college in Michigan. She was a political science professor, and she has a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan. So let's join them both, or let's welcome them both. We're also going to have a little bit later, Jennifer Lee is going to join us. She is the PATH Landlord Engagement Lead, and she's going to talk to you all a little bit about what PATH is doing to get, hopefully help cities engage with landlords to encourage them to take advantage of some of the programs that the county is offering to house some of our homeless population. So with no further ado, I'll leave it to Elizabeth or Meredith, either one, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marcel. Really pleased to be with you all today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we'll be sharing a little bit of background with you on Project Roomkey, Project Homekey, and the County and LASA's COVID-19 recovery plan for people experiencing homelessness. If you just go to the next slide, please. So just in terms of how we'll structure it today, I'll provide a little bit of background on Project Roomkey. I know some folks on the line maybe be more familiar with the program, but just to kind of get us all on the same level playing field, we'll talk about how the program emerged and what its goal is. Meredith will share more about the Project Roomkey operational aspects, and then I'll tell you a little bit about our ramped down plan for Project Roomkey. I'll turn it back over to Meredith then to talk about the recovery plan that LASA drafted in response to a motion from the Board of Supervisors. And then finally, we'll come back and then we'll talk about how cities can get involved in supporting this plan. And then we'll come back to Project Homekey to share kind of where the county is with that effort. So if we can go to the next slide. So Project Roomkey is a collaborative effort. The state, county, and LASA have been working closely together to secure hotel and motel rooms for vulnerable folks experiencing homelessness. So what this program does is it provides temporary housing for people who, if they were to become infected with COVID-19, would potentially face some serious complications. So those over the age of 65 or who have chronic health conditions. This is separate from the county's isolation and quarantine sites that are meant for people who have tested positive or been exposed to COVID-19. Roomkey is for those who are not COVID-19 positive or are not infectious, and is meant to prevent the spread of COVID-19. One of the benefits of Project Roomkey has been to keep local businesses open and members of our communities employed. Obviously, many businesses are struggling in the current context. Roomkey was a way for some in the hotel industry to continue to bring in revenues while also serving this important purpose of preventing the spread of COVID-19. In addition, by enabling people experiencing homelessness to self-isolate within these hotels, we are helping to prevent a surge on our healthcare system so that folks who are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 don't end up filling up the hospital beds and really straining the system. And finally, just generally preventing the spread of COVID-19 is one of the key goals. And we have seen, considerably lower instances of COVID-19 among the homeless population, somewhat surprisingly for many observers, and we think in part because of the strong efforts that the county and its partners have taken during this period. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about Project Roomkey operations. And just to say, since this is my first time speaking, I'm also very excited to be here with you all today and look forward to a robust question and answer session after our presentation. And do want to just say that also Jennifer Lee, who Marcel introduced at the top, has joined, and we're lucky to have her with us as well to talk through opportunities for landlords in your communities to partner with us in the recovery plan effort. So Project Roomkey operations, LASA is leading the overall operations of the hotels participating in Project Roomkey. We have partnered with local agencies, including PATH, who Jennifer Lee is from, but homeless service experts to administer the programs on site at these hotels. We have on site, in addition to homeless service providers that are administering or providing the client services, we also have LASA staff on site to troubleshoot and do vendor relation work. LASA holds the contracts with both the meal operations and nursing on site, as well as obviously the homeless service providers. So we have LASA staff there to ensure that all of those services are provided seamlessly. We have county disaster service workers providing additional support to the clients and providers on site. We have nursing staff, as I mentioned. Those nursing staff are responsible for ensuring that no one entering the facility has any symptoms of COVID. So they're doing temperature checks and health screenings with both staff and people, clients staying at the hotel to ensure no one has any COVID symptoms. And they are also doing some light medical services, including wound care, if that's necessary. And then there's also 24/7 private security that's contracted through LASA to ensure that no one is entering the premises who is not, currently staying there. That if there are any sort of issues that arise, that we have security on site that can respond to those issues. We also have, obviously we partnered with homeless service providers to work with guests on any sort of behavioral issues to ensure that program rules are followed and that the health and wellness checks and food are getting triaged to the guests at the hotel. Next slide, please. Oh, this is me too. Got it. Liz and I are trading off. So yes, how are people assigned to PRK sites? So PRK sites are not walk-up facilities, meaning that anyone who is referred to a PRK site needs to be referred by a homeless service provider and then essentially matched to a vacant room at a PRK site. They need to be and then they're given an actual intake time where they need to show up at the PRK hotel to do the intake paperwork with the providers. So these, again, are not walk-up sites. In order for a client to participate in Project Roomkey, they must be referred by a homeless service provider, a healthcare provider, law enforcement, call center, or another service provider. Next slide, please. So we currently have 37 Project Roomkey sites in the county. One hotel recently closed or came offline. Some hotel agreements are held by other jurisdictions within the county. 4,100 rooms are under agreement in the county. 3,700 of those rooms are occupied by PRK residents, and the remaining rooms continue to be sort of filled as the every day. The 4,300 participants are currently staying at PRK sites. So while PRK sites can't accommodate families with minor children, couples are able to access Project Roomkey, as well as single adults who have caregivers to assist with their activities of daily living, which is why we have more people than we have rooms. Nearly 7,000 people have been served since April 2020. And we have, people have exited Project Roomkey to a variety of different locations, including to permanent housing. And our goal for every single person who has entered Project Roomkey is for not one person to return to the streets, even if they came from an unsheltered location. We want to ensure that they are connected to a permanent housing resource for long-term stability, and if needed, an interim housing resource until they can achieve that housing placement. Next slide, please.
So obviously we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's a significant need for shelter for people experiencing homelessness, just as there has been for the past 6 months. However, we are transitioning into a sort of ramp down process for the Project Roomkey hotels that will gradually take place over about the next 6 months. This is a bit of a fluid process because we are trying to be responsive to the current conditions on the ground while working closely with the landlords, the hotel owners, the service providers, the Department of Public Health, LASA, and all of our partners to make sure that we are appropriately closing hotels when it makes sense to do so. As Meredith said, the goal is to transition folks out of PRK sites into permanent housing and to completely avoid returning folks to the street once they leave Project Roomkey sites. We did close one site in August, and there are 3 more sites of those 37 that were mentioned that will close in September. Our process right now is that the Board of Supervisors offices, the elected offices, we consult with them about the current conditions and make decisions 2 months in advance about which sites will be closing based on the most current information that we have. And then we communicate with all of our stakeholders to implement that plan. We also are working closely with the state as they helped us to ramp up. They're also helping us to ramp down, and our state partners come in and help to inspect the hotels and work along with the county to kind of terminate the agreement with the hotel owner and address any potential issues that have arisen so that the hotel can go on to serve other guests after they finish in Project Roomkey. Next slide, please.
Great, so I'm gonna talk about sort of both the Project Roomkey exit plan and our broader COVID-19 recovery plan. So as Liz mentioned, we've been able to put 4,000, well, 7,000 people over the course of Project Roomkey into safe housing to protect people from COVID-19 who are particularly susceptible to adverse consequences or even death from COVID-19. But we really want to ensure that we are able to provide safe housing exits, permanent housing exits for people in Project Roomkey so that no one goes to the streets. We also want to ensure that we, as the homeless service system, are able to recover, assist people in recovering from this both economic and public health crisis. So some of our guiding principles of our recovery plan, well, let me give you a little bit of background. So the Board of Supervisors actually created a motion several months ago now, or a few months ago now, directing LAHSA to create a COVID recovery plan to do what I just described, which is to create a roadmap for the homeless service system and people experiencing homelessness to recover from both the economic and public health implications of the COVID crisis. We responded by putting together a comprehensive plan outlining the necessary permanent housing resources to be able to house 15,000 people who have been identified or projected to be COVID vulnerable within the broader universe of people experiencing homelessness. So essentially, working with researchers, we were able to identify that 15,000 people within the homeless population met the criteria, the CDC or criteria for COVID vulnerability. That's either 65 plus or having a complex health condition that makes someone susceptible to severe consequence or even death from COVID-19. We, in putting together that plan of how to effectively permanently house 15,000 people, and I should say in our plan, we were identifying that would be 15,000 additional people permanently housed on top of the service, the homeless service delivery system existing resources. We had several guiding principles that drove our planning. One is what you've heard several times now, which is that no one sheltered through COVID-19 efforts should return to the street. This has been an amazing effort to, again, house our most vulnerable neighbors and to protect communities. And we want to ensure that those efforts lead to permanent solutions for people's homelessness, and that is permanent housing. We want to quickly house 15,000 of the most vulnerable people. And in order to do that, we are implementing several system enhancements to be able to move people into permanent housing as quickly as possible, including by partnering with Path Lease Up to recruit landlords to essentially accept the subsidies that are being provided through the recovery plan. We want to curb inflow into homelessness. We recognize this is not just a public health crisis, but that the economic ramifications of COVID are such that we anticipate seeing after the eviction moratoria are lifted a potential significant inflow into homelessness. And so we want to be equipped with that and do whatever we can to curb inflow. We want to prepare the system for future crises. So while I hope that COVID-19 is the only crisis on top of a crisis we face, you know, the crisis of homelessness compounded by the crisis of COVID-19, but we want to ensure that we are prepared if there are further crises. And we also recognize this is a crisis that's not going away anytime soon. We need to, even as we're continuing down continuing into the COVID-19 crisis, we need to be able to continue shifting to meet the need and to serve those most vulnerable. And then we want to ensure that there's a racial equity lens in all of our efforts. We know that Black people are disproportionately represented in the homeless population. We also know that within data on COVID-19, that Black and Brown people are more adversely impacted from a health perspective from COVID. And so we want to ensure that as we're responding to both the public health and economic implications of COVID, that we are keeping a racial equity lens front and center. Next slide, please. So the overarching rehousing recovery strategy, this is a graphic that's helpful for some people and not helpful for others, but I'll try to talk you through it. So as I mentioned, the goal is to rehouse 15,000 of these high-risk individuals who have been identified. A subset of those folks are in Project Roomkey, about 4,000 as we previously described. But there are, as I mentioned, other COVID-19 high-risk individuals and other high acuity people in our system who are not in Project Roomkey, but are also in need of permanent housing resources to be safe from COVID, but also to end their homelessness. We currently have on our community, in our homeless management information system, 12,000 individuals who have been identified as COVID high risk, meaning that they are either 65 plus or have one of those health conditions. So of that population, we are attempting to connect people to what we've outlined in our recovery plan as distinct service pathways to meet different levels of need of the population. This 15,000 group, while they're all COVID vulnerable or mostly all COVID vulnerable, they all have different service needs. Some people need just a light touch intervention, a short amount of rental subsidy for them to achieve housing stability, while some people are going to need ongoing, what we call permanent supportive housing, where people will have a permanent subsidy combined with supportive services to ensure that they're able to maintain and maintain their housing. Essentially triaging people, identifying of those 15,000 who needs a light touch intervention, who needs a medium term intervention, what we call rapid rehousing, which is intended to be where the person experiencing homelessness receives a subsidy, they pay a portion of rent, and then ideally pay more and more of the rent until they can fully sustain the subsidy, and the subsidy ends, and the person just continues to pay their rent completely on their own. As I mentioned, permanent supportive housing is really that ongoing subsidy and supportive services for the most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. We also want to ensure, as I mentioned, that we have an answer for inflow, and problem solving is really a strengths-based approach that we take for every person who's coming into the homeless service system, to look at what existing resources or mainstream benefits they might be able to access that would prevent them from needing to access the very precious and limited homeless service resources. So for instance, if someone comes into a homeless drop-in center, but they have, they've been estranged from a family member, but might have the ability to bridge that or to repair that relationship and stay with that person, we want to connect them to that resource rather than identifying a subsidy and sort of moving forward with that. So the intention is to identify the least amount of intervention we can provide to allow somebody to successfully address their housing issue. Next slide, please. So we put out this plan. The plan called for $601 million of new resources to implement. The county has allocated $145 million. That's actually a slightly an underestimate, because in addition to the $145 million the county allocated, they have also allocated additional Measure H funding over the next 2 years, as well as additional Corona relief funds, specifically for ongoing Project Roomkey operations. But essentially, our 15,000 plan is not fully funded, is still the take home from that. But we are prioritizing contracting our recovery plan dollars that we have received to Project Roomkey sites in particular, or starting with Project Roomkey sites rather, so that we can ensure, again, that everyone in Project Roomkey has a service pathway identified, and that those housing resources needed by those individuals are connected to those in Project Roomkey. We have focused on the sites that are coming offline first. The site that Liz mentioned that came offline in August, unfortunately, we didn't have the funding in hand to be able to provide additional resources through the recovery plan, but we were able to work with the provider at that site to leverage existing resources. And of the 68 people who were staying in that site that came offline, not one person returned to the streets. So we were able to achieve our goal with that first site coming online. And for the offline and for the 3 sites that are upcoming, we are diligently working to ensure that we will also have no person exit to the street. The contracts include funding for a variety of service pathways, as I described. These subsidies include very short-term subsidies like shallow subsidy, problem solving, where it might just be that the person needs a security deposit or a very light touch assistance, rapid rehousing, which I described, and bridge to permanent supportive housing, or bridge bridge recovery housing, which is intended to be a 24-month subsidy that for those individuals that are sort of most in need of intensive services, with the idea that they would then be transitioned to a federal or a locally funded permanent supportive housing resource. And then obviously to ensure we're continuing to ensure a racial equity lens in this. So looking at, as we prioritize Project Roomkey for recovery rehousing, how does that impact any sort of racial disparities we're seeing in housing placement, and how can we account for and pivot to respond to that? Next slide, please. So now I'm going to pivot to talk about opportunities for cities. So as I mentioned, a lot of additional, the county has invested additional more than $145 million to these additional subsidies for people in Project Roomkey and other COVID high-risk individuals. And there is a need, those are subsidies that don't have a brick and mortar building that they're attached to. So what we, the homeless service system, need to do is partner with local landlords to be able to identify landlords willing to accept the subsidies and units for those people to move into. So I want to hand it over now to Jennifer Lee, who runs the Path LISA program. I'll let her introduce herself, but essentially LASA funds through dollars from the county a robust landlord engagement and retention program to ensure that we can partner with and maintain partnerships with landlords to provide permanent housing with the use of these subsidies. So I will hand it over to Jennifer Lee, and I created the next slide, which represents a little bit of the Path LISA. Could go to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to Jennifer to talk through the strategy of landlord engagement and retention.
Hi, thanks for having me today, and thanks for the introduction, Meredith. So my name is Jennifer Lee, and I oversee the LISA LA program, which is an initiative of PATH with support from LASA and the Homeless Initiative. And pretty much we are a centralized landlord engagement model in the county of Los Angeles that's really built off of marketing research to address what we know landlords want in the community. I don't think it's a surprise that they really want a high return with a low risk on their investment. So we have built a program that addresses a lot of their concerns to ensure that they are getting their on-time rent payments and a thriving and safe community for all of their tenants. So through the LISA LA program, we offer financial incentives and protections for owners that are opening their doors to people experiencing homelessness who have a rental subsidy and supportive services that come with them as they're moving into housing. As a program and as a community, we know that transitioning from homelessness into housing does take a little bit of support from our community. So we are definitely mindful of that and include that as part of our service package. So the financial incentives to landlords in our community include, holding fees so that we can pull their units off the market for exclusive access for people applying connected to our community partners. We also have a risk mitigation program where we understand that there's some stigma or some barriers associated to people moving in off the streets, such as maybe a criminal conviction or past evictions, or maybe low income people are trying to establish their employment again. So we understand that owners may be assuming a little bit more risk, so we do have additional protections for them in terms of damage protections as well as vacancy loss should a tenancy not work out. We also have a very robust mediation program for those landlord-tenant concerns. All of our certified mediators are trained through the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs to help provide support to avoid evictions, because we know during our market research, that was actually the #1 concern that was brought up by owners. So, and we know that as a service provider, evictions are a significant barrier to ongoing housing. So we wanted to make sure that that was a strong component of our program, so that when owners and participants or tenants now participate in that program, we have a solution at the end that doesn't include an eviction if we can avoid that at all costs. And one of the big ones is we do have a free marketing component of our units to landlords. Internally, as part of this program, we built a Zillow-like platform for all homeless service providers in LA County. So over 70 service providers and over 2,000 case managers access this platform. So landlords don't have to market their units anymore. We take all of that on for them. And all of the support, and all tenants come with supportive services and the rental subsidy, whether it's a permanent subsidy like Meredith had mentioned, or if it's a rapid rehousing subsidy, because we do want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to lower any kind of risk for owners willing to work with us. So if owners or if cities want to send us owners, we would greatly appreciate this kind of partnership. They can sign up for our program for more information at leaseuplosAngeles.org. They can also email us directly at leaseupla@epath.org. And you also see a phone number on the page on the slide that they can call. So we're kind of like coordinated entry system for landlords. There is no wrong way to get a hold of us. That's who we are.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think we'll go to next slide.
Great, thanks, Jennifer and Meredith. We're eager to get to your questions, so I'm just going to quickly give a little overview of Project Homekey, which is the latest and greatest initiative from the state of California. So building on the success of Project Roomkey in July, the state announced the availability of $600 million in funding for local jurisdictions, both cities and counties, to acquire properties to house people experiencing homelessness, as well as people at risk of homelessness. $550 million of those dollars come from the state's allocation of federal coronavirus relief funding, and then an additional $50 million is from the state's general fund. So the goal here is really to rapidly sustain and expand housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and are impacted by COVID-19. This is a really exciting opportunity for jurisdictions across the state to, find permanent solutions to homelessness. We all know that housing is the most crucial aspect of ending homelessness. We have a vast shortage of permanent housing as well as interim housing, and we're now at a moment where we can make a significant dent in that shortage. Next slide, please. So the program works so that jurisdictions were and are able to apply for funding to acquire properties for use as either interim or permanent housing. The County of Los Angeles submitted its applications for various properties in August. We are on the edge of our seat waiting to hear back from the state, hopefully in the next week or so, to find out which projects will be funded. We have been working very closely with the Board of Supervisors offices, and in turn they have been in direct communication with the cities around the county where these sites are located, if they're located in incorporated cities. So if you represent a city within the county and it is home to one of the sites that we applied for funding for, you would have been briefed about the possibility of that site being acquired. And once we hear back from the state, there will be more information forthcoming about which sites are going to move forward. So the next step, if and when funding is awarded to the county to purchase these properties, well, one of the sort of key aspects of this program is that all the funds must be expended by December 31st, 2020. So we're on a very, very tight timeline to close on the properties that get funded. We would close on them before the end of the calendar year or sooner. And then the next kind of caveat is that we have 90 days to occupy the sites with the target population, and that is folks experiencing homelessness. And so the state really wants to see these properties being used essentially immediately to house folks who are on the streets or are at risk of becoming homeless. The county intends to operate the sites that it acquires if awarded funding, first as interim housing, as temporary homeless housing, and then convert it to permanent supportive housing, which will require some rehabilitation, primarily the addition of kitchens or other features that are necessary in order for us to meet federal guidelines for the use of federal housing vouchers, which would help to support the operations of that permanent housing going forward. The program allows for jurisdictions to apply for funding for a variety of types of properties, including hotels and motels, and including current Project Roomkey sites, but it's not restricted to those. So counties and cities were able to apply for other hotels that were not a part of Project Roomkey, or apartment buildings, or other types of properties that would be a good fit for homeless housing. So again, I was hoping that maybe we would get more information by today, and I would be able to share a little bit more detail with you about what's coming next with Project Homekey, but we expect to be able to do that soon. And we think it'll really have an impact around the county should these various properties get funded, so that we can house people temporarily and then ultimately provide permanent housing solutions for our homeless neighbors with these properties. I think that's all for our presentation today, and we're now happy to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate the information. I'm going to stop the screen share right now. For those that are watching online on the webinar, there's a Q&A function. There's a little button down at the bottom right on your panel for the Zoom. If you hit that and type in your questions, I will relay them to the ladies and we'll get some answers for you. So I'll give you a couple minutes to type them in. I know there's some slow typers out there, but we'll give them a couple minutes, and then I'm going to do some stuff here, and we'll see if there's any questions. This is one of the parts that always slows these things down. If we were in a room, we would be able to ask the questions. I'm getting texts, but if I open them, it'll turn off my camera. So if you have questions, if you're texting me the questions, type them into the Q&A, please, so I can see them, or send me a message in here. So we still have about 30 or so folks still on, but no open questions. So I have a quick question, just from the perspective of what you are talking about. We've obviously been engaged with you for quite a bit on this stuff, and the communication with cities, I think, has gotten much better. I think that was one of the qualms, if you remember early on with Project Roomkey, was that there wasn't a lot of communication because there was this sort of rush to get this project going because of everything surrounding the pandemic and trying to get those homeless population, those folks, into a safe environment. What do you see as the path going forward now, and what do you think has changed as far as your communication with the cities and your engagement with them? And I mean, aside, obviously, things like this help, but what are your strategies to keep the cities informed about what's going on? And obviously this is changing pretty quickly. We have to, spend a lot of money by the end of the year to get folks housed.
Sure. Yeah, so we have definitely, put a lot of effort into improving our communication strategy with cities. As you mentioned, initially with the launch of Project Roomkey, we were really in crisis mode and trying to move as quickly as possible to address the public health emergency. As we kind of settled into our processes around Project Roomkey, we did establish good lines of communication with cities throughout the county, and we're continuing to share information as we work on the ramp down process of Project Roomkey. So as I mentioned in our presentation, we have the board offices approving closures of Roomkey sites. It's about 2 months ahead of time. So once we know that a site is closing, we are either our office, the Homeless Initiative Office, or one of the board offices will communicate with the city manager and or mayor, whoever's been the direct contact, to let them know what the timing is around that. And then, as we work on Project Homekey, of course, we'll continue to share information once we know the exact sites and the timelines. We have been speaking at various city council meetings or directly to elected officials or city staff, and we're always happy to give a presentation or answer questions. We're really, we welcome the questions, we welcome the opportunity to share information, and we want to be as responsive as possible.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate it. And you've been really responsive. I know you kind of got named later on to be sort of our point, or one of our points, with dealing with all of this stuff. So we appreciate you've been incredibly helpful. So now we have a couple questions. So first question comes from Councilmember Tragars from the city of Walnut. She asks, what are your plans to relocate the residents staying in the hotel in the unincorporated area of Walnut? So I guess there's a project, it sounds like there's a project Roomkey site in unincorporated Walnut, and what are the plans to help relocate those folks?
Yeah, so we have, and I need to pull up the specific provider, but I know for all three of the sites that are coming down in September, including the Walnut site, we have contracted with the homeless service providers in the San Gabriel Valley region to assist with the recovery rehousing, the administration of recovery rehousing subsidies for those individuals. We are on track. LASA has been hosting bi-weekly calls with the providers of those three sites coming offline to ensure that no persons currently staying at those sites exits to the streets. And I can pull up the specific details of that for the Walnut site, but we are confident that we will be able to achieve that goal.
Great, thank you. Let's see, we have now the questions are flowing in. See, people, they get all jazzed up. One question and it's like an avalanche here. So the next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Must be a good one. So the Lease Up LA program would benefit both local landlords. I guess it's making the assumption that the Lease Up LA program would benefit local landlords, cities, and local residents by providing housing subsidies, reducing vacancies, reducing visible homeless on the city streets. It's asking for clarification on that, I guess.
I can definitely take that on for everybody. So the Lease Up LA is definitely a beneficial program for local landlords, cities, and all residents. Just to clarify, we don't actually provide the subsidy for the rental units. We provide the units to our community partners, who then LASA or the federal government gives funding to for those subsidies. So that complicates things a little bit, but just know for landlords that a subsidy does come with the applicant, as does supportive services. So it is a beneficial program for everybody that is a part of it.
Great. I'm sure that those are the types of programs that our cities like to see. A lot of our cities have issues, as I'm sure you've all heard, with, maybe not having the right type of property in their city to create a shelter or, pushback from residents or whatever it might be. And I think the best, or one of the best solutions to tackling the homeless issue is kind of placing those folks in with, so they don't sort of get that tag of this is a homeless shelter, this is a homeless, area, and they're just kind of blended in with the local community. And I think that makes it easier to transition back into whatever, coming out of their homelessness and back into, normal society. So that's really good. So we appreciate that. Let's see, I have, another question here. This is from Jennifer Perez in Norwalk, my alma mater. She asks, what percentage of those who have exited PRK have actually gone on to other programs of permanent housing? And do you have the numbers for each site confirming this information?
Apologies, Marcel, can you repeat that question? I was reading the question in the chat as you were.
Sure. What percentage of those who have exited the PRK sites or the program have actually gone on to other programs or permanent housing? So what percentage of the people that leave PRK have gone on to other programs or permanent housing? And do you have the numbers for each of those sites confirming the information?
Yeah. So for the one site that has come offline in Lomita, we do have the actual statistics. So of the 68 individuals who were staying there, 40 of them were transferred to another Project Roomkey site. And I believe the total, 68% of the people who were at the Lomita site were connected to a permanent housing resource and are someplace in the process of actually obtaining either a unit if they got a scattered site subsidy or moving in to an actual project-based building. And your broader question of do we have So, you know, in the course of Project Roomkey, obviously being operational, people leave Project Roomkey for a variety of reasons. And we try to track in our homeless management information system, when people leave, we try to track their exit destination. We require our contractors to track exit destination. The challenge is that some people might go and visit a family member and never return to a Project Roomkey site. And so we do have what's considered to be unknown destination, where a person leaves the Project Roomkey and we don't know the where they ended up. But for every site that is coming offline, we are tracking where every single person in the site is going, what housing resources they're being connected to, and ensuring again that no person exits to the streets.
Great, thank you. And there is a question in the chat from Liz Riley from City of Duarte, and Elizabeth did a good job of answering the question, but only us four can see it. So I'm going to ask the question. I'll let you answer it, so everybody else that's out in the attendee world can hear the answer. Elizabeth, Liz Riley asked, "Do single-family homes qualify for Project Roomkey, or must it be multiple unit buildings?"
Sure. So yeah, I think the question is about Project Homekey and the state's funding to acquire properties. I would primarily defer you to the state's Project Homekey site, and Marcel can maybe share that link with participants later. But yes, I have heard that some cities and counties are applying for funding to acquire single-family homes, and they might use those in a variety of ways. So, you know, we don't yet know which projects are going to be funded, but that is allowable, I believe, and you just would need to show the impact that would have on reducing homelessness in your jurisdiction. And there's obviously a wide variety of needs around the state in terms of what the homeless populations are like, the size of the homeless population. So a single family home might make sense in certain jurisdictions. But I think that there is still an opportunity to apply for a limited amount of that funding. There was an initial deadline in August 18th, for kind of a first tier of funding that was reserved by geographical location. So there was a certain amount dedicated to the LA County and all the cities and jurisdictions within the county. There was a certain amount for other counties. After September 29th, for the September 29th deadline, there is still some additional funding, but it's kind of open to all to potentially access that funding. And they're looking for sort of high impact proposals to be funded through that second tier of funding.
Great, thank you. And we don't have any more questions at this time. So if we don't get any more questions in the next about 12 seconds, I will say once again, thank you, all three of you, for taking the time out of your busy day. I'm sure this is a huge, huge issue that deserves the attention that it's getting and more, and all of the resources as well. And hopefully our cities and the county and the state will all work together to, if nothing else, put a large dent in the homeless issue that we're facing right now. I think we're starting to see hopefully a little bit of the reluctance, particularly from community members, that a lot of times push back on this, because I think everybody believes that something needs to be done, but they don't want it to be done in their neighborhood. And so that sentiment, it's everywhere. And as we see, some cities are taking really bold measures. We saw it in Bellflower. And as the cities start to move forward, I think people are starting to realize that, you know, doing our part doesn't have the negative impacts that the assumptions have led them to believe. And so as we continue to work, and as more and more people contribute to the issue, the fear, I think, subsides from having, you know, this mindset that if we do something here, everybody's going to come that's homeless, right? But if everybody's doing a little bit of a part of it, that population starts to migrate, or, you know, go back into, you know, regular society, and it doesn't have a big impact on one community or two communities. So thank you all for all the work that you do every day on this. We really appreciate you. We look forward to working with you as we move forward into Project Homekey and more stuff that's coming. So thank you all again. This concludes our webinar, our virtual fall educational summit. Thank you, ladies. Have a great day.
Thank you.